what are some less known, darker facts about beloved countries? New Zealand has one of the highest youth suicide rates in the OECD. The Dutch once ate their prime minister. Excuse me, what the? On Toronto's beaches up to the mid-1950s, it was common to see signs that read "No dogs or Jews allowed." Edit. Not so much of a spoiler alert. Blacks were also in that group. If you've ever looked at a country like Liechtenstein on a map and wondered how a country that small can maintain a flourishing economy, the answer is that they're one of the largest offshore banking sites in the world. Most people only think of the Cayman Islands when it comes to offshore banking, but the Cayman Islands aren't even close to being the only place where rich people stash their money to avoid paying taxes on it. Most of the places that do it are territories and not countries. The Cook Islands, Anguilla, Jersey and Guernsey are a few other big offshore banking sites, but Liechtenstein has made it the core of their economy. France had concentration camps. Spain created over 50 new torture methods in the past 300 years. Here in Colombia we have enough material to have a dedicated post. But for mentioning one. In 1928, a banana company workers ceased their production and got in protests. They wanted better work conditions because they worked a lot for the crap of payment they got. The government's response was send the National Army to shoot a place where between 2,000 and 4,000 people were sleeping or relaxing. Officially 13 people died. During World War II, Japan used living POWs for bayonet practice. That's the most humane war crime they committed. Bhutan forcibly expelled Hindus in order to create its happy paradise. During World War II, the Swiss National Bank accepted large quantities of gold from the German Reichsbank as payment for Swiss export shipments, weapons, ammunition. A large part of this Reichsbank gold had either been looted by the German occupying forces from the stocks of the occupied countries, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, etc., or it came from the victims of the Nazi persecution of the Jews, Holocaust. Not just stolen gold. Living Jews kept money in the banks, and those Jews still have active accounts that their families cannot gain access to because some banks are so old that they keep to 100-year-old traditions of needing owner authority to release the money. Canada is the biggest producer of asbestos in the world, although using the product is banned in the country. Norway used to suppress the natives from up north by separating them from their parents and forcing Norwegian culture upon them. Learning Norwegian and how to live like a Norwegian. I guess everyone with a native population did that then. Sarawak ignores the natives called the Penan. They still lives in the jungle and are basically a jungle nomad, but due to the timber industry making big bucks, the government and logging companies ignore them and destroyed close to or more than 50% of the rainforest. If you find information from the government they will say is not true and whatnot. Bruno Mansa was an activist who fought for their rights and the perseverance of the rainforest, but he mysteriously disappeared. I think it was in the 90s. Can't remember. Until today no one knows what happened to him. Conspiracy theories ranged from him hiding or lost in the jungle to the government assassinated him. New Zealand. High rates of child abuse. Hidden poverty and a housing crisis on the brink. Not enough housing, and what there is extremely expensive to both rent and buy and rapidly rising at a ridiculous rate. It's also not particularly high quality. Scrolling through these comments feels like when your family thinks you're old enough they start letting you in on the dark family secrets. Netherlands slaved the out of Africans. And the Belgium did some in Africa that would make Joseph Mengele go, oh. In around 1910 the Australian government decided it was a good idea to steal indigenous children from their mothers and send them to schools to be taught. Some of them never even saw their parents again. They were called the Stolen Generation. Evidently everyone was addicted to their natives. Canada has an incredible racist history involving taking Aboriginal children from their homes and bringing them to residential schools where they were beaten, underfed, and forced never to speak their language. Many of them died. Spain expelled the Jews in the 1490s. No Jewish children were born in Spain again until the 1960s. In Canada, the police would frequently take native men for midnight tours or starlight drives where they would drive them miles out of town and kick them out of the car. This happened in the middle of winter and they would take their coats and oftentimes boots as well before they kicked them out. In Argentina, the right-wing government took the babies of pregnant left-wing prisoners and adopted them into military families during the Dirty War. New Zealand is crippling mental health, poverty and housing issues which many gloss over because Jacinda Ardern exists. Not sure if beloved as much as pitied, but I'll chime in about Haiti. They won their independence from French colonists in 1804, which was incredible and proud. But after the war, Dessalines committed a genocide against white residents. Upon his death, there were tensions between the blacks and the murat class, and the country was divided between Henri Christophe in the north with the support of most blacks, and Alexander P. registered Saint-Jean in the south with the murats and gens de couleurs, men of color equals people who were freedmen pre-revolution. Christophe established an autocratic kingdom and an unpaid feudal plantation system, near to slavery albeit with less cruelty, to try and export sugar for profit. While P. registered Saint-Jean went from democratic rule to eventually abolishing the legislature. The country would be reunited in 1820 by Boyer, only for him to conquer the future Dominican Republic, which Haiti would hold until 1844. Fun facts to balance that out. Haiti was the first country to recognize Greek independence against the Ottomans. Haiti gave Simon Bolivar sanctuary, after which he was able to rebel against Spain to create Gran Colombia. Mosquitoes in Brazil can literally kill you from 1 out of 5 illness. In parts of Colombia, it's tradition to have sexual relations with female donkeys as a way of practicing safe sex before marriage. In one episode of the Grand Tour, Season 3, IDK, the team are in Colombia and Jeremy Clarkson spots a man having sex with a donkey. And then he interviewed the locals who all enthusiastically explained it was just a thing they did. I was kind of incredulous when I saw it, because I thought, no way that is real. But then, how in the wide world would the Grand Tour get away with fabricating such an outrageous fake national custom and not cause an international incident for Amazon? Turns out it was legit. FML. Don't ask Germany how it got those borders. During World War I, Poles were drafted by both sides with the promise that upon victory their nation would be restored from the partition that had destroyed it decades earlier. Hundreds of thousands of Poles killed each other trying to free their homeland. Ireland has to this day still not recovered population-wise from the British-imposed famine of the mid-19th century. Belgium is a pretty chill place. During World War II, Canada turned away fleeing Jewelry, Romanians, and Gypsies seeking asylum from the horrors of the Nazi Party. They didn't believe their claims of what was happening until near the end of the war when the camps were discovered. I'd never turned down free Jewelry lol. Japanese army arped women from South Korea and China. I recommend you to see the documentary. Anyway, they pay the women at a ratio of 70 men to single women. In some states in the US, child brides are legal. There's over 200,000 child brides, some of them being like 13 years old. In Canada, there's a guy called Scott. He's a dick. In Scotland, there's a guy called Dick. He's a Scot. For all the weeaboos out there, the Nanjing Massacre could also qualify for the worst stuff the Japanese did during their prime. A whole lot of RP murder and deception. Sweden was partially responsible for why Jews had to stamp a J in their passports. Also, they tried very hard to eradicate the cultures of the indigenous people of Lapland by forcing their children to attend Swedish schools and to abandon their customs. The Swedish Social Democratic Party established the State Institute for Racial Biology that studied genetic differences between races and how to refine the racial traits in the Swedish population by avoiding race mixing between Swedes and the Sami people, Jews, and Romani people. Between 1906 and 1975, Sweden conducted forced sterilizations on people they saw unfit to have children, such as transsexuals, homosexuals, allegedly promiscuous people, Romani people, alcoholics, or people with mental illnesses. The Kingdom of Hawaii, long before they were a state, was illegally overthrown by the US government in the late 19th century. Since then, Hawaii has only gotten a single apology from Bill Clinton 100 years later. In France, the last time a guillotine was used for execution, the first Star Wars was in theaters. In the center of the capital of my country there is a Lenin's palace that Stalin built. Germany's efficiency is blocked by ignoring digitalization for many years. Our political system is corrupt as hell, and even though we have a social system with healthcare, the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger and bigger. It gets set up more and more every year, but for some reason all the people that I meet when traveling think that we Germans living in a country full of efficient and happy workers. For the United States, in Wyoming, Hawaii, West Virginia, it's still technically not illegal to have sex with animals. Not beloved by many, I admit, but the UK started a war to force China to buy opium from them. Invented concentration camps in Kenya after World War II, used concentration camps, killed tens of thousands, arped, tortured, etc., and then destroyed as much of the evidence they could. Made a big fuss of outlawing slavery but paid so much in compensation to slavers the associated debt was only paid off in the 1980s. Exported homophobia around the world, so that a number of countries now have the death penalty for something they really thought was fine before colonization, and now sneer at those countries unironically. One of the massacres of Muslims they perpetrated was intensified by soldiers coating the bullets in pig fat. Caused a major famine in India by diverting much needed crops to feed already well-fed Europeans, the leader at the time having a well-known hatred of Indians. Allowed a great famine to kill over 1 million Irish people because famine was seen as a natural form of population control, etc., etc. The partition riots in India, the British finally withdrew. Pakistan and India's partition lines were created, and up to 4 million people died in warfare. I'm just scrolling through looking for people talking about Ireland. If you were born when the United States of America was founded, and only aged when they were not at war, you would not be old enough to run for U.S. president. The USA has, functionally, always been at war. The reason that Ireland is the land of the potatoes and the potatoes are staple crop is because many centuries ago the British owned the land and forced the Irish to work, and they were left with small plots of land. The potato is one of the best crops for how much it can grow in a small space, especially considering the climate of Ireland. So potatoes being part of Irish culture is because it was the only plant they wouldn't starve with. Taiwan Rock. Well, we murdered a bunch of protesters back in OSI 47 and White Terror. Hi. German here, and I've just googled to see if there's anything I can add about our beloved country. And you will not believe some of the I've just found out. The Irish are incredibly prejudiced against their traveller community. I would say racist, but people go deep into semantics if you try to claim it's an ethnic issue. It's not even thought of as prejudice there. It's just normal to hate them and refuse them entry into pubs and things like that. They're viewed as low life, dirty criminals by most people in Ireland, and there's a lot of public resistance to improving their situation or giving them more rights. A lot of Irish slurs like tinker are just part of the lexicon. It has been government policy and popular public sentiment that they must be forced to settle down and give up their old ways of moving around with the seasons. Most of the places they used to temporarily inhabit have been closed off or bought up, and they are forcibly removed. Every government policy is designed to force them into settling down into permanent accommodation, and they have the highest suicide rates, alcoholism and drug addictions per capita in Ireland, and one of the lowest life expectancies in Europe. Most don't complete any education above primary school, and for most Irish they're viewed as unemployable. Source: I am Irish. Canada killed many Indians, then covered it up. The United States has forced economic shockholds and coups on dozens of other countries, as well as then carried on to install one of our yes men as dictator of some said countries, who then sell us copper, oil, or whatever resource for cheap. And it forces the populations of those countries into a perpetual state of wage slavery. Yeah. In the 20th and 21st centuries, just plain old colonialism is now frowned upon. So neo-colonialism, where instead of Guatemala becoming the 51st state, they stay Guatemala but are also reduced to basically a banana factory that we make money off of. China is perpetrating a genocide and eroding civil liberties around the globe. Not exactly beloved right now though, are they? Circa 2021. As a woman in India. Apart from the long list of things done to our indigenous population. Japan. There are restaurants who have official policies to legally refuse to serve non-Japanese patrons. Can confirm. Was there. Refused admittance despite being with a Japanese colleague. He was way more embarrassed than I was and made a big deal out of it to no effect, other than buying me a load of extremely expensive booze, as in booze is expensive generally. The White Australia policy. Up until a few decades ago, the Australian government was actively trying to wipe out its entire Aboriginal population by stealing children from their parents and giving them to white families where they would eventually breed with white people and the country would eventually have a fully white population. Aboriginal people also weren't legally considered humans in Australia until the 1960s. Australia has somehow been able to convince the world that it's a laid-back, happy country despite having one of the most oppressed minority populations in the entire world. Sweden had Rasbiologiska Institutet Biological Institution and concentration camps for German and Austrian communist social democrats that was deemed too far left, that had fled to Sweden. It was discovered by the Soviets in 1945 when they got hold of the correspondence between Germany and Sweden. Everyone heard about the crusades the Catholics did on the Middle East. At the same time, they were also making crusades on the Baltic region. But nobody hears that 2/3 of the entire Christian world had been devoured by invading Islamists prior to the crusades. Some people are so ignorant they think Islam was the original religion of the Middle East. Finns killed 3% of their own population in concentration camps after civil war in 1918. We also sent Jews to Germany during World War II and still are one of the most racist nations in Europe. Edit. We also actively participated to siege of Leningrad, which led to 1 million civilian deaths. Your beloved Germany actually led 2 wars against the world. When did this happen, or was it recent? Fun fact. Actually both world wars were because of Austria, not Germany. Well, not enough people know about the Islamic Revolution in Iran. IMO. More pitted than beloved nowadays. But it was a nice and rather free country before. Especially for women. They were able to vote. Were encouraged to get education. Women and men mixed freely. And even 6 women were elected in parliament prior to it. Canada is pretty dark between November to March. Winter and all you know. The British Navy once attacked Copenhagen, sank half the Danish fleet, stole the other half and burned 75% of Copenhagen to the ground despite not being at war. They did it just in case the Danes decided to side with Napoleon. Yeah, no. Just in case. This also coined the term Copenhagenization for attacking someone you are at peace with preemptively. Just in case. That everything you love was built off the assumed worthless class of people who are expected to just be okay with it. Germany went through a period where they did a bunch of racist in the 1930s and early 1940s. Lol. Okay. I need a source on this one. Tibet before the Chinese invaded was a feudal theocracy with a majority of the population being serfs, read, slaves, to the control of the Buddhist elites. US has an entire library worth of dark facts. Everything from kidnapping and drugging people in mass to see what would happen, to sterilizing swaths of minorities, to internment camps of hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of minorities, to massacres of minorities. And that's just recent times. That isn't even touching manifest destiny, slavery, drug empires, human trafficking. I mean, if you can think of an atrocity, the US has done it, including genocide. Yes, there are worse places in the world, but US is the only one that actively brags they're the apotheosis of morality.